You remember the last time you saw him clearly. Maybe it was in a hospital room with that specific antiseptic smell that now triggers something deep in your chest. Maybe it was at the doorway of your childhood home, his hand raised in a wave you didn't return with the enthusiasm you felt inside. Or maybe it was just an ordinary Tuesday, unremarkable, forgettable, except now you can't forget it because you didn't know it would be the last time. And you loved him. God, you loved him. But you never said it. Not in the way that mattered. Not in the way that would have landed, that would have been received, that would have closed the circuit between what you felt and what he knew. You carried it, this heavy, burning thing in your chest through every birthday, every graduation, every moment of pride or disappointment. You felt it when he taught you to tie your shoes, when he fell asleep in his chair watching television, when he worked late and came home exhausted but still asked about your day. The love was there, undeniable, fundamental, the kind of love that shaped the architecture of who you became. But it stayed trapped behind your teeth, locked in the vault of your throat, translated into every language except the one he needed to hear. And now? Now you live with the paradox that defines this particular kind of psychological haunting. The love you felt most deeply became the silence that echoes loudest. This is about more than regret. It's about the specific torture of knowing you possess the antidote to someone's doubt about their worth, their impact, their legacy, and you kept it sealed inside yourself. It's about the weight of unexpressed gratitude, the archaeology of swallowed words, and the way certain types of emotional withholding don't just affect a single relationship, they rewire your entire capacity for vulnerability. Because here's what makes this so psychologically complex. You didn't withhold love out of malice. You withheld it because somewhere along the way, you learned that love was safer unexpressed, that vulnerability was dangerous, that the risk of saying, "I love you," outweighed the reward. And that lesson, that core belief about emotional exposure didn't disappear when he did. It metastasized. If you're watching this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know the specific flavor of grief that comes not from absence, but from silence, not from what was taken, but from what was never given. And you know the way this one unspoken truth has become the template for every relationship that followed. Let's talk about why you couldn't say it and what it's been costing you ever since. In attachment theory, there's a concept called avoidant attachment, a pattern developed in childhood when emotional expression is subtly or overtly discouraged, when vulnerability is met with discomfort, dismissal, or absence. The child learns that their emotional needs create burden, that love is transactional and conditional, that safety lies not in connection but in self-sufficiency. But what we're examining here goes deeper than attachment style. This is about emotional foreclosure, a term used in developmental psychology to describe the premature shutdown of emotional exploration and expression. It's when you learn, often unconsciously, to close the door on certain feelings before they can fully form, before they can demand to be spoken. Think of your nervous system as a house. In a healthy emotional environment, all the rooms are accessible. The living room of joy, the basement of grief, the attic of anger, the bedroom of love. But when vulnerability is dangerous, when emotional expression carries risk, your nervous system starts locking doors. It boards up windows. It creates what neuroscientists call affect phobia, a learned fear response to your own emotions. Your father may have been a good man. He may have provided, protected, sacrificed. But somewhere in the architecture of your family system, there was a rule, spoken or unspoken, that certain emotions were too much, too needy, too feminine perhaps if you were raised male, too dramatic if you were raised in a culture of stoicism. And so you learned the art of emotional compression, taking the full spectrum of what you felt and condensing it into acceptable forms. Love became duty, gratitude became obedience, admiration became silence. You became fluent in the language of presence without intimacy, of loyalty without vulnerability. This is what psychologist John Bowlby called deactivating strategies, the unconscious techniques we use to suppress attachment needs when expressing them feels unsafe. You learned to translate "I love you and need you to know it" into "I'll make you proud" through achievement. You learned to convert vulnerable admission into practical action. You showed up, you helped, you achieved, you made him proud. But you didn't tell him you loved him. Here's where the neuroscience becomes devastating. The human brain has what's called a snegativity bias, we remember, and weight negative experiences more heavily than positive ones as an evolutionary survival mechanism. But this bias doesn't just apply to trauma, it applies to omission, to the things left unsaid. Every time you felt the urge to express love and suppressed it, your brain registered it. catalogued it. And over thousands of interactions, this pattern becomes what neuroscientists call implicit memory. Learning so deep, it becomes automatic, unconscious, structural. You didn't just learn not to say, "I love you" to your father. You learned that expressing love, in general, is dangerous. That vulnerability opens you to rejection, abandonment, or the exposure of need. And your father? He lived with his own version of this, his own locked doors, his own foreclosed emotions. Because this pattern doesn't start with you, it's often inherited. Intergenerational trauma researchers call this all transgenerational transmission, the way unresolved emotional patterns pass down through families like genetic code. He probably couldn't say it either. To his father, maybe even to you. And so you both lived in adjacent emotional prisons, separated by the bars of inarticulate love. The cost of unexpressed love is a specific kind of grief that has no ceremony, no ritual, no social recognition. There's no funeral for words never spoken, no memorial for emotions that died in your throat. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss, grief that has no closure, no clear beginning or end. But that term doesn't quite capture the particular torture of knowing you could have said it, that the words existed, that they were right there vibrating in your chest, waiting for permission that you never granted them. This is the weight you carry now, not just the loss of him, but the loss of who you could have been with him if you'd been brave enough to be vulnerable. Every conversation you replay, you hear the phantom version, the one where you told him, where you said, clearly and without performance, "I love you, I'm grateful for you, you matter to me." And in those phantom conversations, something fundamental shifts. He softens, you connect. The distance that always existed between you, that respectful, polite, careful distance, disappears for just a moment, and you see each other clearly, but you can't have that conversation now. And that's the grief. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote about the concept of despair, not as sadness, but as the state of being in the wrong relation to oneself. He argued that true despair occurs when we are not who we are meant to be, when we betray our own essence. You betrayed your essence when you withheld your love. Not because you were malicious, but because you were afraid. And now you live in what Kierkegaard would call the sickness unto death. The ongoing death of your authentic self, replayed in every relationship where you still can't say what you feel. Because that's the real cost. This didn't end with your father. You became an adult who has to work to say, "I love you" to anyone, who feels physically uncomfortable during emotional conversations, who deflects intimacy with humor, with intellectualization, with changing the subject, who says "you too" instead of "I love you" because initiating the vulnerability feels like standing naked in front of the firing squad. You became someone who translates love into action because words feel too exposing. So you do favors, send gifts, show up reliably, prove your worth through utility rather than risk, the simple, terrifying honesty of emotional admission. And the people who love you now, they feel it. They feel the way you hold back, the way there's always a wall, however thin, between your heart and your words. They feel loved but not told, valued but not affirmed, important but never quite sure. You're recreating the exact pattern that wounded you. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You think you're just bad at emotional expression. You think you're just private, reserved, not the type. But the truth is deeper. You're still protecting yourself from a danger that no longer exists. You're still that child who learned that saying, "I love you" carried risk, and you're applying that childhood logic to adult relationships that are starving for your honesty. The grief you carry isn't just about your father. It's about every moment of intimacy you've forfeited since then. Every relationship that stayed surface level because you couldn't go deeper. Every person who walked away because they needed words, not just actions, and you couldn't give them. This is the philosophical weight. You have been haunted not by what was done to you, but by what you failed to do, by your own silence, by the gap between what you felt and what you expressed. And that gap has become the defining space of your emotional life. So what does this look like in practice? How does unexpressed love to a father translate into the texture of your daily adult life? You might be someone who says, "I love you," only in response, never first. You wait for the other person to take the emotional risk, to make themselves vulnerable, and only then do you reciprocate, giving yourself plausible deniability, a safety net. You're not actually initiating intimacy, you're just reflecting it back. And some part of you knows this, which is why even saying it feels hollow sometimes. You might struggle with accepting love when it's expressed to you. When someone tells you they love you, you feel uncomfortable, suspicious, or overwhelmed. You deflect with humor, you're just saying that. With self-deprecation, you must be crazy, or with immediate reciprocation that bypasses actually receiving what was offered. Because if you can't express love genuinely, you also can't believe you're worthy of receiving it. You might have relationships that stay perpetually good enough, but never truly intimate. You have friends, partners, family members who care about you, but there's always a ceiling to the depth. You share experiences, but not vulnerabilities. You're loyal, but not open. And people sense this. They feel the invisible boundary you've erected, and eventually, some of them stop trying to cross it. You might be someone who expresses love exclusively through acts of service or gift giving. You'll drive across town to help someone move. You'll remember their favorite coffee order. You'll spend hours researching the perfect birthday gift. But you won't sit across from them and say, "You're important to me, and I need you to know that," because actions feel safer than words. Actions can be dismissed as duty or courtesy. Words are undeniable vulnerability. You might have difficulty with eulogies, toasts, or any moment that requires public emotional expression. You freeze when asked to speak at weddings or funerals. You write a speech that's funny or informational, but carefully avoids being too emotional. Because to stand in front of people and express love feels like emotional nakedness. Like every defense you've built is stripped away and you're just, soft, exposable, breakable. You might be someone who emotionally disconnects when conflict arises in relationships. When a partner or friend expresses hurt or need, you shut down, intellectualize, or withdraw entirely. Not because you don't care, but because their emotional expression triggers your learned response. Emotions are dangerous, vulnerability is risk, expressing need leads to abandonment. And so you protect yourself by disappearing emotionally, which is precisely the pattern that wounded you in the first place. You might carry a persistent, low-grade guilt that you can't quite name, a feeling that you're constantly failing people, not meeting some invisible standard, not being enough. This is the internalized voice of unexpressed love. It translates into generalized inadequacy, because on some level, you know you're withholding your full self from the people who deserve it. You might overcompensate with certain people while remaining closed with others. Maybe you can say "I love you" easily to a child, a pet, or a parent who isn't your father, but with peers, partners, or your own reflection in the mirror, the words won't come. You've created safe zones for vulnerability and danger zones for silence, and you've become an expert at navigating between them without ever addressing the core pattern. Here's what you need to understand. These are not personality traits. These are coping mechanisms. You are not just not emotional, you are emotionally self-protective. You are not bad at vulnerability. You are expertly good at avoiding it because you learned it wasn't safe. You are not incapable of deep intimacy. You are capable of it and terrified of it in equal measure, because the one time it mattered most, you stayed silent, and now that silence is your default setting. The unlearning begins with witnessing this pattern without judgment, not fixing it yet, not forcing yourself to be different, just seeing it clearly. Recognizing that every time you deflect an "I love you," every time you translate emotion into action, every time you hold back what you feel, you are protecting a wound that your father's absence left behind. You are still in conversation with him even though he's gone, and until you address that, you will recreate this pattern in every relationship for the rest of your life. So how do you heal something you can no longer apologize for? How do you resolve a conversation that will never happen? You begin by understanding that healing unexpressed love doesn't require the other person to still be here. It requires you to finally, honestly express it, even if only to the memory of them, even if only to yourself. This is what therapists call inner child reparenting and grief integration work. You sit with the part of you that never said "I love you" to your father, and you ask, with genuine curiosity, what were you afraid of? And then you listen. Maybe you were afraid he'd be uncomfortable. Maybe you were afraid he wouldn't say it back, and that would confirm your deepest fear that you were unlovable. Maybe you were afraid that expressing love would make you weak, vulnerable, or less masculine in his eyes. Maybe you were simply following the script your family had written for generations. Men don't say these things, fathers and children don't need words, love is implied through presence and provision. Once you understand the fear, you do something radical, you thank it. You thank the part of you that stayed silent because it was trying to protect you, it was doing its job. But now you're an adult, and that protection has become a prison. You write the letter you never sent, not because he'll read it, but because you need to say it. You speak out loud to a photograph, to his grave, to the empty chair across from you. You say every version of "I love you" that you swallowed. You say, "I was proud of you, I was grateful for you, I saw you, you mattered." And this is the hardest part, you practice saying it to the living. You choose one person in your life right now, and you take the risk you never took with him. You sit across from them and you say, without preamble or performance, "I need you to know that I love you, that you're important to me, that I'm grateful you exist." And you let it be awkward. You let your voice shake, You let the discomfort wash over you without running from it, because this is how you rewire 4 decades of emotional foreclosure, repetition. Neural pathways are changed through practice. You cannot think your way out of this pattern, you have to act your way out of it. You have to become someone who says, I love you, first, often, and without needing it reciprocated. The poet David Whyte writes, the cure for exhaustion is not necessarily rest. The cure for exhaustion is wholeheartedness. You have been exhausted by your own withholding, by the constant vigilance of emotional self-management, by the weight of everything you've never said. Wholeheartedness means saying what you feel when you feel it. It means choosing the risk of rejection over the certainty of regret. It means understanding that vulnerability is not weakness, it's the only pathway to genuine connection. Your father is gone, that cannot be changed. But the pattern he left behind, that's still living inside you. And every day you get to choose whether to perpetuate it or break it. This is not about fixing yourself. You are not broken. You are someone who adapted brilliantly to an environment that didn't know how to hold your emotional truth. But adaptation that was once survival can become limitation. And now you're in a new environment. One where emotional honesty won't cost you safety. It might cost you comfort. It might cost you the familiar protection of your walls. But it will give you something you haven't had since he died. The peace of knowing that the people you love know they're loved. Not through inference, not through action alone, but through the simple, terrifying, liberating truth of your words. Say it while they're here. Say it even when it's hard. Say it especially when it's hard. Because one day you won't be able to. And the only thing worse than the grief of loss is the grief of silence. You loved your father. He deserved to hear it in words, not just feel it in gestures. And so do all the people in your life right now who are waiting, whether they know it or not, for you to finally tell them. The cage of unexpressed love has no lock. You've been holding the door closed this entire time. You can open it whenever you're ready. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of what we don't say. And remember, the goal isn't to become someone who never struggles with vulnerability. The goal is to become someone who struggles with it anyway and speaks the truth despite the fear. That's not fixing yourself, that's becoming whole.